You're listening to the Skylight Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello, my beautiful and lovely listeners, and welcome to Skylit. This is the Skylight Books podcast, and I'm your host, Lance Morgan. Today, I'm so excited to welcome SJ Sindu to talk about her new hybrid collection of essays and poetry, Dominant Genes. SJ Sindu is a Tamil diaspora author of 2 literary novels, 2 hybrid chapbooks, and a forthcoming graphic novel. Her first novel, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, won the Publishing Triangle Edmund White Award and was a Stonewall Honor Book and a finalist for a Lambda Literary Award. Sindhu's second novel, Blue Skin God, was published in November 2021 by Soho Press, and her graphic novel, Shakti, is a forthcoming from HarperCollins. Sindhu's hybrid fiction and nonfiction chapbook, I Once Met You But You Were Dead, won the Turnbuckle Chapbook Contest and was published by Split Lip Press. A 2013 Lambda Literary Fellow, Sindu holds an MA in English from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a PhD in English and Creative Writing from Florida State University. Sindu, I'm so excited to have you on. I'm so super excited.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Florida State grads.
Yeah.
Florida State grads in the house. Oh my God, no, I'm so honored to have you on. You are an author I love. From my local Skylight, you might have seen Sindhu's book, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, on our staff picks list recently. And I wonder who put it on there. I'm not saying it was me, but I'm saying that everyone should read this book. It's fantastic. And no, I'm just such a huge fan.
Thank you so much.
No
Thank you for
problem.
having me.
No, it's our pleasure. Sindhu, I will have so much more time where I will just be gushing all over your work. And that was sounding more inappropriate than I meant it to sound. I meant it in no, I'll be just crying about how much I love all your work. But before that, you have a reading for us today?
I do. I'm going to read the title poem from Dominant Genes.
Ooh, so excited. All right, take it away.
From the wombs of true believers, I came out faithless, a godless, decadent heathen. But somewhere in my foggy ancestral memory, I recall that women used to worship snakes. We'd put out milk for cobras, hoping they'd leave the baby in the crib alone. And if they drank from our offering, we were guaranteed good luck for a week. But that was long ago, before the Eve-hating white men came with injections of snake fear shot right into our pagan faith. Now when we see a cobra, we scream, and the neighbors run over with hoes and machetes. One time, when I was little, I saw one the size of my arm slithering on our veranda, and I got to scream, "Cobra, cobra, snake." They all came, men yelling to save me, my grandfather wielding a kitchen knife and hacking the cobra to bits right there in our backyard garden. My mother's mother's mother lived to be 100, insisted on sleeping in her own house until the very end. But my mother is afraid of snakes, and as a child, tormenting her was a favorite pastime. I'd beg snake toys from relatives and chase her. I would twist snakes out of newspapers and old scarves. Watching my mother scream and run away, I laughed. I know now that it's a phobia, that she had no control over her reaction. But back then, her revulsion was a sign of weakness, and I could feel like the strong one. I've always had a serpent tongue, though I learned early to silence its bite. This too is a gift from the women of my family. I can cut through a lover's blood during any fight. This is a liability, this ability to destroy a person. When I told my mother I wanted to be a writer, she said nothing. She didn't have to. We come from a country where writer means dead child. In Harry Potter, speaking serpent tongue meant you were evil, but I really think J.K. Rowling couldn't imagine herself out of her Christianity-addled brain. Like how Ray Bradbury could think up LED wall TVs, but not a world in which women had careers. My mother tells me to write nice stories, to keep my serpent tongue caged. This is her wisdom. In this new world, my ancestral power is to be feared. I'm young and I ignore her, but she still goes to sleep every night thinking, dead child, dead child, dead child. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my God. I mean, it gives it a new level to hear you say it too. Have you done any like spoken word before? Because I feel like you have the presence of a spoken word poet, or just spoken word. Is there just like a spoken word reader? No, you have that.
Well, thank you.
No
I've
problem.
never done spoken word, but I grew up going to a lot of spoken word competitions, and I have a lot of friends who do spoken word, so I can definitely see how that has affected my sort of reading voice.
I'm not saying you should, but I mean, I would love it. I would be there snapping my finger. No, Sindu, it's such a pleasure to have you on. One of 80 billion times I'll say I'm a huge fan. But Dominant Genes feels so special in your work. Especially, I mean, with all your work, it's so brave to me to see someone talk about queerness and gender and the fluidity of both so freely in the work, and not in a westernized way, in a very immigrant diaspora context. Can you talk about like the journey to get to there for you?
It was definitely a long journey, and I made a decision very early on. And I think, at that time, it wasn't a conscious decision because I was, 18 or so, and I made
Right.
it. But I decided that I was going to write what I wanted to write, and whatever happens as a result of that, whatever fallout happens was just going to happen. And I think part of that was because at the time when I started writing seriously in college, I was also a queer rights activist, and that had forged me in many ways,
Yeah.
to be, and I wasn't out to my family, and I was out to everybody else, but not to my family at the time. So I was terrified, but
Right.
I had this idea that I should not let that fear creep in even a little bit to my writing. I didn't want my writing to be curtailed by fear of any kind. So I decided that, I would be fearful on my own time, but when I was writing, I was going to be fearless, as fearless
Oh.
as I could. So that's kind of been my approach since I was, since I was starting out, since I was 18, and it's worked well so far. I mean, after Marriage of a Thousand Lies came out, I was really scared that, I was going to face a lot of backlash from the South Asian community, the diaspora community, my family. Um, Instead, I had a lot of, the community really was supportive, at least like the second generation community,
Yeah.
my generation of diaspora writers and readers were very, very supportive, and my family just sort of ignored the book and pretended it wasn't there. So there, I my worst fears were never really realized, and I just kept going with that approach since then.
You make it sound so casual, but like, wow, I mean, that the choices you made are just so powerful, it's not, nothing you said there, like, you made it sound so effortless, but it's not. It probably took a lot of effort and time and realization of yourself to do that, and like so commendable to see that, especially in your work. Dominant genes seems like, a revisit of a lot of that for you, and a lot of emotions. And where the other work, I feel like definitely, I'm gonna guess, comes from a lot of your past too. This just seems more direct. Can you tell us like how it was, going that deep into yourself and exposing a lot of your own self through your writing there?
Yeah, I don't write a whole lot of nonfiction,
Mhm.
mostly because I like the sort of psychic distance that fiction provides, that I can take a
Mhm.
kernel of truth and a kernel of experience and turn it into something completely different, weave it
Mhm.
into a completely different story, and move it into something new. And
Mhm.
with just that kernel inside, that's me.
Mhm.
With nonfiction, you don't have that distance. You don't have that protection.
Yeah.
It's you. You bury yourself on the page and hope for the best and hope that the
Mhm.
reader understands. And so I don't do a lot of it, but when I do, it tends to be sort of fragmented and experimental
Mhm.
and lyric, and so that a lot of that is in this chapbook.
Mhm.
And I think my first chapbook, I Once Met You But You Were Dead, was also like this, just disparate things I had written over the course of 5 or so years that I then
Mhm.
collected and shaped. So shaping meaning like I had to put it in the right order, I had to take pieces out, put
Mhm.
pieces in, and it's not just everything I wrote in the last 5 years. That's not
Right.
fiction. But a similar thing happened with Dominant Genes, where I realized that 5 years had sort of passed since I put together the last chapbook, and I had all of this new material.
Mhm.
And my partner is a poet, so I went through my entire schooling not taking any poetry classes because I was kind of terrified of poetry. And then the pandemic hit, and we were sort of rattling around in this apartment together, and I was like, why don't you teach me poetry? Just, let's sit down every other day and you can lecture to me about poetry and we'll have these conversations. And I started to write poetry for the first time since I was a teenager. And it was great. It was very freeing,
Yeah.
to not have to sort of, with novels, you have to sort of sit down and re-enter this world every single
Mhm.
day,
Mhm.
over and over and over for years. And with poetry, you could just sort of, have a moment, have an experience, and then go have another experience with a different poem. And like it was a really different writing process, and I really
Mhm.
appreciated that. And so that's kind of how it all came together. I realized that even though the form was different, what I was writing about was very similar. I was writing about matrilineal heritage and what
Mhm.
it means to inherit not just physical traits but also psychological traits, or
Mhm.
trauma from your family, or intergenerational experiences like immigration from your family. And
Mhm.
so this is a lot of it is about inheritance.
And like, especially for diasporic communities, especially first for this generation, like our generation too, as I'm a first generation Jamaican, I feel like talking about inheritance is not a it's not an easy topic. It's not a topic that, like, I feel like for um a lot of American like multiple generation people, it's been talked about. Like, you look at like Dynasty, or um shows like This Is Us or Parenthood. You see the inheritance in that show. You see what's been built for them over generations, where it's new for us. It's we have this other side of ourselves, like far away from this country, and then we have this everything we have here, which is new. It's feels like a lot is on our shoulders there too, and the pressure of that is, it's great. No one knows. And like, I feel like for a lot of people, you blame family, you blame uh you blame the older generation who brought you here, you blame circumstance, you blame the country, but like it's, I mean, the last one, I don't know if that one's, not without blame, but like the family, it's, I feel like as I've aged, you realize that they have their own faults and have their own, you might have been in their situation and done similar things, right? And you have to understand them a little bit more, I feel like, for me.
Yeah.
But like it's, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah, no,
easy.
that's a really great point, that that for families who have been in the US or who have
Mhm.
immigrated many generations ago, all of those generations have sort of built this inheritance for them. And
Right.
like first generation and second generation immigrants are figuring that out
Yeah.
as, right now in the immediate. So
Mhm.
there's a sense of urgency,
Right.
I think, for diaspora communities to think about inheritance, in a way that doesn't exist for many Americans. And
Yeah.
maybe it does in different ways.
Maybe it
But
does.
this existence of being in a liminal space, like between
Mhm.
cultures,
Mhm.
where your family is connected to something that you are in danger of losing,
Yeah.
right? As somebody who is assimilated or assimilating into a
Mhm.
different, especially westernized culture, you are in danger of losing everything you've inherited. So like,
Yeah.
how do you preserve that, but also how do you build, how do you bring it into the future
Yeah.
without becoming really regressive?
Mhm. And I mean, I personally, and I am saying all this after, like, your writing has done a lot of making me reflect on it as well. Like, I mean, and I will talk about this book so much. I'm so sorry. I apologize from now. And I know this is a book that has not come out recently, but Marriage of a Thousand Lies, was so, I mean, important for me to like grow and understand my own family and my own, choices. Cause for the listeners, if you haven't read this book, why am I giving the summary? Would you like to give a quick summary of
Sure.
Marriage of a Thousand Lies?
Sure. It's about a woman named Lucky. She's a Sri Lankan American lesbian who's married to a gay man, and she's pretending to be straight for her family. And at some point, she moves back home to her
Mhm.
mother's house to take care of her grandmother who's fallen ill. And she, rekindles a relationship with her first love, who is engaged to be married. And it's Lucky's coming out story, very simply, but it's much more complicated than that,
Yeah.
right? It's
Right.
asking questions of where allegiances lie when you have multiple marginalized identities that are
Yeah.
intersecting and that are conflicting with each
And everything you said there, I'm like, because I sell it all the time, and I'm like, let me, am I describing it wrong? But you said like all the hitting points that I love saying to
other.
people,
Okay.
and I'm just like, I got it right, yes. And I mean, that book made me realize, there, like, you want to live up to the sacrifice your older generation did for you. There's so much like, I feel like, and let me know if you shared this too, like, you as a kid, you watch all the sacrifices they made for you, and like the consequences of those sacrifices and how hard it was. And it's not
Mhm,
easy to like move from another country and raise a family and feel out
mhm,
of place in the community. And I mean, like, I was just watching the show Pen 15, and there was an episode where like the kids are like making fun of their mother because of her accent. Not,
mhm.
but like it's like that. I mean, did I do that to my mother? Probably. I was a little shit as a kid, but like, I mean, it's like, you don't, they had that, that's something that, like, othered them from people
Mhm,
that they were trying to make community with. But then, like, I don't know, it's like you see all of that, so you're like, I have to make my own sacrifices for them to speak, to like live up to their own sacrifices. But what is enough? What is too much? What is you sacrificing yourself to do that? And that's what I mean. I find that in a lot of your Blue Skin Gods does that too in a very amazing way. where like I got that in like your own writing now. Like in Dominant Genes. I God, I'm such a fan of all of these works. But how, but like in that way, did you feel a release in writing Dominant Genes, especially, but even with Blue Skin Gods and Marriage of a Thousand Lives, did you feel a release from your own worry about the sacrifices you've made?
Um, yeah, I mean, most of it was just like me thinking through these issues and trying to
Mm-hmm.
complicate them for myself. I
Right.
think, marriage, I came out of writing Marriage of a Thousand Lives. Like it took 5 years to write. So at the end of the 5 years, I mean, I was also older
Mm-hmm.
than I was when I
Yeah.
started writing it, but at the end of the 5 years, I felt like I understood my mother a lot better, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had a lot more compassion for her than I
Mm-hmm.
did when I first started writing it, when I had a lot of rage and anger.
Yeah.
And over the last few years of writing Blue Skin Gods and writing Dominant Genes, that's sort of been the theme, is like trying to understand what my parents have gone through to make sure that me and my brother are safe, and that we're that at a certain point, when you do sacrifice that much for someone, it you can justify expecting a lot from them. I've
Mm-hmm.
always sort of borne the weight of a lot of expectation from my family,
Yes.
in terms of academics, in terms of success, in terms of like, who I get married to, in terms of everything. um, but it makes sense that when,
Mm-hmm.
like, not that it's good and not that it's healthy, but it makes
Right.
sense that it makes a sort of brutal type of sense
Mm-hmm.
that, the amount of sacrifice that has gone into their immigration, and just there's a sort of a piercing loneliness that goes
Mm-hmm.
with immigration and displacement,
Yeah.
being, the outsider always. And I think it
Yes.
can really open your eyes to see your parents, your immigrant parents, in their, I guess, natural habitat, in their old home. I
Right.
will never forget when I visited Sri Lanka, um, the once and only time I did since moving, and I heard my father speak a third language fluently that I didn't even know he knew. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I knew he knew like English and Tamil, but he spoke Sinhala, which is another language that's spoken in Sri Lanka, like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely fluently. And I was just stunned. I had lived my entire life not
Yeah.
knowing that he could even speak it. And it sort of brought home to me the fact that many immigrant kids don't know a lot about their parents, and
Yeah.
they've never sort of known their life before. And I think for every sacrifice we know about, there's probably many we don't.
And I mean, the opposite could be said. The opposite, I feel like it's true too, because we don't know. I feel like their generation also doesn't. They can't also know us in a way.
Yeah.
It's we're new to them.
Hmm.
We're not the kids that were raised around. We were not. They can't be the parents their parents were to them, because this is
Hmm.
another culture. This is another. And like, it also, I mean, and I get this in your writing a lot. There's a sadness there. There's a sadness in the disconnect there. There's a sadness in, I like to say, sadness in the American dream of it all. Like, it's the American dream is such a positive. It sounds so positive. It sounds so like dreamy. It sounds like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But like,
Hmm.
there's a sadness in like losing so much. And like, even the way I was growing up in the culture, the rich culture that like I my family's culture, I loved it. I love um the food, the music, the connection, the community. But like, you know I'll never get it the way they did, and no one else will understand it who's not like specifically in that community. Like kids I was raised around will never understand that. I feel like as a kid, when I would bring like Jamaican food to school, the kids would be like, what is that? And only recently, like the people now are like, oh wow, other cultures' foods are good. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, duh. Like what? Like, oh my God. But like, yeah, and I I feel that emotion in your writing in a way that I think that's what drew me in. And what draws a lot of um especially queer first gen or immigrant, like our generation kids, into your work. um but another thing that I've been seeing is that I feel like culture is shifting in a way where kids who don't feel that are looking to understand. They're seeing that like, oh wow, this community exists. These especially white audiences are like, oh wow, this whole queer community I never knew exists, where it's not the Love Simon conversation, it's not the um L word and what we're
Mhm.
seeing there. It's not. One of the things I loved in Marriage of a Thousand Lies at the beginning was when people were like, oh, why don't you just come out to your family, they'll understand, or something. Like it was like around
Mhm.
that idea, and they were like, what? Do you not understand what, like, why are you trying to comment on something from your experience onto mine? And I feel like
Mhm.
there it's starting to like really sink into culture that like there is a separation there, and it's the other side's responsibility to understand the immigrant side. In your work I think helps a lot
Yeah.
with that. Have you seen like that audience come to you, or like come to your work in that
Yeah.
way?
I think having just between when Marriage of a Thousand Lies came out to when Blue Skinned Gods came out, the
Mhm.
the audience had shifted, the cultural discourse, the conversation we were having had shifted, where you know, selling Marriage of a Thousand Lies was really difficult because I kept getting rejections that were like, well, if this book was either queer or South Asian, we would know how to sell it and who is going to read
Mhm.
it. But because it's both, like who's going to actually read this book? Queer South
Mhm.
Asians, like that's too small of an audience, was what I kept hearing. But that conversation had totally shifted by the time Blue Skin Gods was coming out, where there was this, I guess, people had like tested it. I think the success, like the massive success of even movies like Crazy
Mhm.
Rich Asians
Right.
or Black Panther or any of
Mhm.
the like sort of mainstream blockbusters. And it's sad that it's the blockbusters that have to do it, but it's true. Like it's the
Yeah.
blockbuster movies that prove to the people making the decisions at the very top, who are almost all white men, that people of color or queer people like can headline,
Yeah.
can carry a story and can attract white audiences. And I think
Right.
that was the initial concern. And I think it's really good that white audiences are more and more interested in
Right.
um, stories of people of color. There's a certain, like, I'm afraid that it's a certain like voyeurism that is behind it. I think that's part of it, is there's this aspect of voyeurism, but you have to start somewhere. and
Mhm.
and it's at least good that authors of color are being read much more widely than they were before, that
Yeah.
their authors of color are no longer seen as a niche investment, they are seen as
Mhm.
a mainstream possibility.
Yeah.
And really, that's all you can ask for. Culture doesn't change fast, and it's in small incremental changes. So at least that's something, it's important to know how much farther we need to go, but it's also important to celebrate the small successes we have.
I mean, yeah, and it's small. It's not as fast. It's small and should
Mhm.
be a lot faster. And better. But yeah, but in what you were saying, I like, how did that make you feel though, to like, when you were selling Marriage of a Thousand Lies and you were getting those rejections, and then going like the whiplash of, Blue Skin Gods having a different effect? How did you feel for that? Because I feel like I was over here, you were telling me that, I was like, what? How dare I, like, want to go like pitchfork and torch over there. But like, how did you feel to like, not have your work understood like that at the beginning, but then the next one just total, like, maybe not total, but like a 180 there?
It was, let's just say it was unexpected. I was
Mhm.
preparing myself for a very, very quiet book launch where, Blue Skin Gods would come out, no one would care,
Mhm.
no one would stock it, and that it would just sort of fade away.
Mhm.
And it didn't even have, like, at least Marriage of a Thousand Lies was championed by queer readers. And I really think, queer readers and South Asian readers were the ones who really, really got behind the book, and the reason why the book even, did marginally okay.
Mhm.
Um, but with Blue Skin Gods, the queerness is much more subtle. Like, it's there, but it's not the focus of the story. So I was also
Mhm.
afraid that, queer audiences wouldn't champion the book, or wouldn't care,
Mhm.
and that South Asian audiences might be pissed off that I was attacking religion, and I was just
Mhm.
afraid that that it would get lost in the shuffle. And it was coming out, it was supposed to come out in June of
Mhm.
2021, and which would make it a summer read,
Right.
but it got pushed back because of the pandemic, and it was coming out in November. And like November, like October, November is when like the big books come out, like the hard
Right.
hitters, the big names. And I was like, oh no, I'm like trying to go up against all these people with really established careers, because the timing of when your book comes out does matter.
Right.
And so I was scared about that, but thankfully, like, it was really, I think part of it was the indie booksellers really, getting behind it. That was that. I mean, that's the only reason why Marriage did as well as it did, was that it was sort of hand sold by a lot of indie bookstores,
Understand.
like Midtown Reader in Tallahassee. I
Woo.
know of several bookstores that hand sold the book, and that
Mhm.
really made a difference. And I think Blue Skin Gods is something similar, that indie bookstores were stocking it and displaying it and putting it on their tables instead of
Yeah.
just like hidden in the stack, and that makes all the
I mean, Midtown Reader sold it to me. Um, so I'm firsthand account of that. And I might have hung around the Midtown Reader store on the weekends being like, you should read this book. Hey, and they'd be like, are you selling books for us? And I was like, yes. And they were like, okay, dude, go for it, have fun. No, and I mean, it's a book that I always tell people when they're looking for, especially queer stories, to look at, because as I said before, there's not a lot of queer non-westernized stories out there being told. And I mean, it needs to be that. Marriage does, but also Blue Skin Gods does too. And I mean, congrats for having two books coming out within what, 4 months of each, 5 months,
difference.
I think 4. Wow. Like, how does that feel? Do you feel exhausted? Like, I can only imagine.
I mean, I feel kind of exhausted from like promo stuff,
Yeah.
but it's very exciting, and I'm really
No.
I remind myself how lucky I am to be here. So it's been really, really good. I hope that people like Dominant Genes. It's the first time I've published my poetry in any sort of collection. I've published in a few journals, but yeah, I am still kind of terrified of saying that I write poetry. So I
No.
hope that people like it.
I mean, I don't know how they couldn't. I mean, one thing I loved about it was that it felt so accessible, where I feel like poetry, I am also not the best with poetry sometimes. I try my hardest. I do everything I can, but I'm not the best at it. And I feel like more people need to, more poetry deficient people need to come out and be out and proud, because hey, we exist. But no, when I remember reading yours and one of the first feelings I had was like, oh, I get this. I feel the emotion, and I feel my own story connecting with this story, with yours narrative in it, in a way that I felt very seen and able to access in a really powerful way. So I understand your worry with it, but I think that you are going to find that there's going to be a big audience that will love and adore dominant genes. Listeners, I'm just going to say that this is going to be me just empowering Sindu so much, because I just want you to, I mean, your work has just had such a hold over me for so long. And I mean, if you don't mind us talking about Blue Skin Gods for a little bit, since it also just came out, and I feel like, the intersection between Dominant Genes and Blue Skin Gods, I feel like in a lot of ways Dominant Genes was not a follow-up to Blue Skin Gods, but like a companion in a lot of ways, where I felt them hand in hand together. But how, I mean, for Blue Skin Gods to just come out too, how have you found like the weight of that, in terms of like religion, especially because that's one of the biggest subjects in Blue Skin Gods? How do you feel that weight of, it's a big weight. I'm like even trying to come up with words for it, because how do you describe the weight of religion, right? But like, putting that in your book and putting that in such like an important way in your book, how do you feel now?
I went back and forth when I was writing the book, and about how harsh to be with my critique, and eventually I decided that I did not want the book to completely come off as a secular critique of organized religion, and that's it, right? I wanted it to be complicated. I wanted it to be complex and nuanced, and unable to be put into so many words, right? And I'm glad that I took that path, that there are no easy answers. In fact, there are very few answers that are given. There's just a lot of questions that are raised that I hope people will come away with and think through their own relationship with religion on their own. There is a harsh critique of the sort of the spiritual industrial complex that has been infected by capitalism. That I feel very comfortable being critical of, but I didn't want to also be critical of people's spirituality. So I was very like trying to walk that fine line, and I'm glad that I did, because I think it ultimately made the book a lot more accessible to a lot more people, and helped people think through some of their religious beliefs. I've heard from some readers who are coming out of other kinds of fundamentalist religions, usually Christianity, but sometimes others, that have connected with the book, even though the religions are very different and the cultures are very different, just because of this experience of what it is to be completely indoctrinated in one thing and one faith, and then start to doubt it and start to lose that faith. So it's been amazing to see that people have connected to it that aren't South Asian, that aren't Hindu or were raised in a Hindu environment, and I'm really really grateful. It's been, I don't know, it's been a wild ride so far. It was just the attention Blue Skin Gods has gotten so far was unexpected, and I I'm really grateful for all of it, and I don't know why it happened or how it happened, but I'm really glad that it did, and that the book seemed to reach a wider audience than I had planned on, honestly.
Well, I mean, I feel like it was a story I haven't heard before. In that, I went into it surprised when I read the synopsis for the first time, because I was like, it feels like such a turn from Marriage of a Thousand Lies in this fantastical, very specific cultural way. Where, I mean, Marriage of a Thousand Lies is specific about a specific culture, but also about like the Americanized version of, like, the culture too, or Westernized version. Where I was like, feels more rooted in, the specific culture. But then I read it and I was like, no, this is I could see the Marriage of a Thousand Lies world in this too, because it's about kind of, family and the expectations put on it, and the sacrifice one makes for that. And I mean, you were saying that, like, you didn't want to, like, have this harsh critique on secular religion, and I feel like when I was reading it, I didn't see any villains except for like the organized capitalistic religion there, but like in the characters, I feel like I didn't see villains as much as complicated characters. How was it, like, you kind of talked about it, but like towing that line for the characters of like wanting to villainize these specific people versus giving them not redemption, but like complexity.
I mean, you know, I think a sort of rudimentary, and this is I teach creative writing, so this is gonna sound like a lesson, but I really think, like, rudimentary understandings of creating complicated characters especially villains, involves like giving a reason for the villainy, right? Like this backstory this sad backstory that explains why they're so mean. And I just don't think that's true to life. I think some people are just prone to meanness. They're just some people, and just like some people are prone to kindness. Not that kindness can't be taught, it can, and I think it can be practiced, but I think not everyone has a reason for being a little jerky, and that's okay. But at the same time, everyone is the hero of their own story, and you have to write your characters that way. So even Kalki's father, who is arguably the villain of the tale, still thinks that he is doing the best thing for his son. As mean as he is sometimes, and as rigid as he is, he still believes that he is doing the best thing for Kalki. And that's really, when it comes down to it, when you approach a scene, that's just what I keep in mind always, that everybody thinks that they are the hero.
And I mean, and I ask on the behalf of, a lot of newer writers who are, of similar experience to you, who might, still have that rage that, you were talking about, that you had when you were at the beginning of the Marriage of a Thousand Lies, who are trying to who are writing these characters and, might want to put the rage into how they view these characters. I mean, time, I'm guessing, is part of it, but how do you separate that from these characters? Do you have any, wisdom to impart on that?
I think fiction, like that, a large part of why I like writing fiction is because fictionalizing these characters allows you to have emotional distance from them, because at some point you have to grow to love each of your characters, and whatever you need to do that. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's that you are spending far more time with the characters than the reader ever will, that you know far more about the character than the reader ever will, that so much backstory and so much depth about the character, and only a little bit of that will peek through in the scene. But the importance is that you know it, and that you have developed this character, and that you have fallen in love with them. And you really have to love every single one of your characters, or else it's just not going to work. In Marriage of a Thousand Lies, I had a hard time loving the character of Nisha. And it took many drafts before I could really feel like I had grown to like or even love Nisha's character. And that's the point at which I think that complexity started to show through in the work. Before that, she was not a likable character, and she's still not. But I think now, like, it took a long time for her complexity to show through. And a lot of that's revision. You just revise and revise and revise until you feel like you know your characters inside and out.
And I mean, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. And I mean, wow, I think you've accomplished so much in your character work there. So congratulations. You did it. You've done it.
Thank you.
I love it. Sadly, I only have time for one last question, and this is a question I want to ask you, just for me, just as a writer who's written, 2 amazing novels, and is putting out this wonderful book of essays and poetry, this hybrid collection, and about to write a graphic novel. How does it feel to be the writer you've become? And you look back at all these years, how does it feel?
It feels both amazing and I feel really lucky. But I also have to remind myself, and my partner reminds me of this all the time, is that I have worked hard to be here. It's easy to sort of want to be humble and to throw out all of the hard work that we've gone through. But I think it's important, especially for marginalized writers, to own that hard work, to own the fact that we've basically clawed our way to this spot. And so I'm working hard to be proud of myself, instead of just wanting to do better, or that's important too. But at this point, I'm trying to take time to rest and to pause for moments of gratitude, and also just be happy that I've made it this far.
Great answer. That's a fantastic answer. This is everything I wanted it to be and more. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for your work. I want to, on behalf of so many people, the person who even recommended it to me, I remember they gave such a empowered and joyous recommendation about how much they loved it. So on behalf of that person, on behalf of myself, on behalf of the many others who felt some sort of connection and happiness that they got a story that is not normally told, with an experience that they share, thank you so much for writing these stories.
Thank you. Thank you so much for championing my work, and for reading it with such care and generosity. It's always, we have a concept of an ideal reader in our heads that's compassionate and loving, but we never know who's going to actually pick up the work. So it's good to meet a reader who's all of those things. So thank you.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I getting a little emotional. So sorry. No, thank you so much. Do you have anything you would like to say to our listeners, the independent bookstore community, and your even local bookstores?
Thank you for all of the work you've done to help my writing become reach readers. And I don't know if it would have been even a little bit possible without indie bookstores. Indie bookstores are the lifeblood of our community and the champion of writers like me that don't get to be in Barnes and Noble. So thank you for that, and keep doing the good work.
And I mean, from the other side, you're a writer like you is what makes it worth it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all my listeners out there. Thank you so much for listening. SJ Sindu, you can buy her books, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, Blue Skin Gods. As of now, Dominant Jeans will be for sale at the store. You can see it on display at Skylight Books, or just go to your local bookstore and have them buy it. And then Shakti, her graphic novel's coming soon from HarperCollins. Is there a release date on Shakti yet?
Summer 2023. Summer
2023. You know where I'll be, at my local bookstore getting a copy. I'm so excited. And I'm so excited for whatever work you come out in the future with. And to my listeners, you have a great and beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.